Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome and thank you all so much for joining us today. I'm Mary Kaszynski, Director of Government Relations at Vet Voice Foundation, the nation's largest network of progressive veterans and military families. We're here today to discuss America the Beautiful, a conversation about conserving our public lands. And we are honored to have with us today Congressman Jason Crow. Congressman Crow represents Colorado's 6th Congressional District. He is a former Army Ranger who served our country in Iraq and Afghanistan. He is a good friend of Vet Voice Foundation and Vote Vets, and has long been a leader in Congress on efforts to conserve and protect America's public lands as the national treasures that they are. This is an issue that matters deeply to our veterans and military families. Congressman Crow, I do have a couple of questions about congressional efforts to protect our public lands, but first I wanted to turn it over to you, sir, for some opening remarks. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you, Mary. It's a really pleasure to be here with you, and thank you to everyone on the Vet Voice Foundation, Vote Vets team for doing this important work. It's incredibly important. There's such a connection between veterans and our public lands. And as a Westerner, as a representative from Colorado, I have seen that play out time and time again. I mean, we have a heritage in Colorado and a deep connection between our military and our veterans and our public lands going back to the 10th Mountain Division, which of course originated and trained at Camp Hale for combat operations in Italy during World War II in the Alps. And then we have preserved much of Camp Hale in those areas, but we continue to try to increase the preservation of those areas with the CORE Act, because now what we've seen is our generation as veterans, the Afghan and Iraq veterans coming back from war, we see that connection between the lands and the vet, and how hiking, biking, camping, just having a connection to the land is incredibly therapeutic and really helps our veterans reintegrate back into civilian life, and how important it is for us to actually preserve these lands, not just for veterans, but for their families and for our heritage as well. So there's a very deep and natural connection between that military service, our veterans, and the preservation of public lands. Plus, I would just add that we just have an obligation and legacy. We learn in the military that duty is about service. It's about making sacrifices for others and for the common good. And we have benefited from the service and the sacrifice of others in the past who have actually made the decision to preserve these pristine, beautiful places for us. And now we have that obligation too. So that natural connection between duty and selfless service that is really critical to our public lands. So one thing I will mention before we open up the Q&A is a couple of pieces of legislation that we're really excited about. I've partnered in the House of Representatives with Representative Simpson from Idaho to actually introduce the Outdoor Restoration Partnership Act. And on the Senate side, it's Michael Bennett. This is a $60 billion bill to help us restore our wildlands, our forests, our watersheds, to help us meet that backlog of forest management that is helping to create these wildfires and these devastating floods and degrading our watersheds right now. So not only will it do that and help us have healthier forests and watersheds and cleaner water, but it's actually going to create millions of jobs in the process. This is a win-win, that with an investment like this, we can have better natural spaces, better public lands, and also millions of new jobs. The CORE Act I mentioned that we voted for and passed out of the House, which would be one of the largest expansions of wilderness areas and public lands the West has seen in many, many years. So those are just a few of the initiatives that we're working hard on right now. I would love to take the question and take the discussion where you all want to take it.
Thank you very much, sir. So the first question for you, as you know, the Biden administration recently announced the America the Beautiful initiative to conserve and to protect 30% of our public lands and natural resources by 2030. Upon seeing that announcement, what was your reaction, and what role do you see Congress playing in implementing the America the Beautiful plan?
Yeah, this is an initiative that I wholly support. I was very excited about it because it's one thing to talk about the value of public lands, and it's another thing to translate that into policy and action. Because unless you define it, what it means. And unless you actually set goals for yourself, then you actually don't achieve it. So I was really glad to see the administration leading on this, setting a defined goal and an achievable goal, and one that is really going to help us get to where we need to be to fulfill our obligations I talked about earlier, making sure that our veterans and our future generations have these lands to enjoy, to recreate, that make that connection. So extremely important that we do this to fulfill that obligation. I'm excited to be able to work with the administration and my fellow members in the House to get it done.
Thank you so much for that, sir. And I will just echo that we're absolutely thrilled to have an ally in the White House right now. And at the same time, that's just one piece of the puzzle, which is why we're so grateful for you and your colleagues in Congress for really implementing the vision I think that the White House has laid out. Turning now to Colorado, you mentioned the CORE Act, which is something that VetVoice has long supported. Can you tell the audience a little bit more about this bill, specifically the importance of preserving Camp Hale as a national landscape?
Yeah, Camp Hale, I talked earlier about it, the 10th Mountain Division that started in Colorado before World War II. And, that generation, the greatest generation of veterans during that time that stood up to serve, they trained and constituted that division in the mountains of Colorado. And what is now, what was then and continues to be called Camp Hale. We've been able to preserve much of that, but not all of it. And the CORE Act would expand that to make sure that we are preserving this for future generations, because it is important to have that legacy, but also provide the opportunity for our veterans to come back and heal. I've been up in that area. I've been, where that training occurred. And, it's really this incredibly communal experience to have that connection with veterans of decades and generations past. And it's more personal for our family, too. So my children's great-grandfather actually was a member of the 10th Mountain Division. He was a first lieutenant and an infantry platoon leader, and he led a platoon in combat operations in Italy. Actually was wounded, hit by artillery shrapnel, and sent back to be treated. And then literally the next day, with his bandages on, walked back to the front and continued to fight. So, being able to take my children now and tell that story about their great-grandfather, but to be able to have a place to do so is an incredibly special thing, and it certainly drives my efforts to make sure that we're getting this done. But beyond Camp Hale, the CORE Act is going to open up hundreds of thousands of acres, or preserve it rather as wilderness area, and that's going to be good for Coloradans, good for Westerners to be able to recreate, hike. Spend time with their families in those areas. Some of the best memories I have as a father are of hiking with my kids. And I hope those are the best memories that my kids have too. But that doesn't just happen. We have development, we have expansion, where we're obviously not getting smaller as a country. But so we have to be deliberate, we have to be intentional about making sure that we're setting these pristine, beautiful, and historic places aside.
Thank you so much for that, sir. That's really an incredible story, and it's it means a lot to hear about that personal connection to our lands and your commitment to this issue. Turning now to another specific piece of legislation. As you know, during the last session of Congress, we finally achieved full permanent funding for the Land and Water Conservation Fund through the passage of the Great American Outdoors Act. What role do you believe environmental conservation and outdoor recreation play in helping our economy recover, both in Colorado and nationally?
Well, certainly in Colorado and the West, that connection is a direct one and a massive one. It's one of the single largest economic drivers in our state. Billions of dollars of economic activity, hundreds of thousands of direct and indirect jobs. You talk about the ski areas, the recreation economy. In addition to that, our source of water. I live and represent a district in the Front Range of Colorado, in the Denver metropolitan area. And our water comes from over 100 miles away in the mountains. And the problem is, if we're not being responsible about it, we're not preserving those watersheds, we're not keeping the integrity of those watersheds whole, we're not going to have enough water. It's not going to be quality water. The other piece I will say is air quality. We're already in fire season. We had the last 2 years, our biggest fire seasons ever on record in Colorado. And we're looking at a historic drought again going into yet another fire season. And we've already had several fires. There are days where we can't see the mountains anymore from the Denver area because the water quality is so bad. And you see asthma rates go up. So the economic impact is a health economic impact. It's a quality of life economic impact. It's an economic impact when we have devastating floods and wildfires that cause hundreds of millions or billions of dollars of damage. And then it's an economic impact when our recreation economy that's so robust is starting to degrade. So we can't let that happen. And that's why we're pursuing these bills like the Land and Water Conservation Fund, the CORE Act, the Outdoor Restoration Partnership Act, because unless we actually make good policy and we preserve it and we invest in it and we make those watersheds and forests more healthy, they're not going to be there and we're not going to be able to have that economy. So it is certainly one of those issues where we have a moral obligation. We have an obligation to preserve legacy so we can bring our kids and our future generations, but just a pocketbook one too. If those other reasons aren't good enough, then just out of sheer economic self-interest, people should be supporting these efforts because it's the right thing to do and it will more than pay for itself through economic activity. And the rest of the country sees that as well. And there's a variety of different recreation and outdoor economies throughout the United States. The Western one is a unique one, but every area has its own recreation economy. And you won't have those and you won't be able to grow them unless you make the investments in them.
Absolutely. Well, as you say, sir, it's a win-win-win, right? It's a win for our economy, for our environment, for our national security.
It is. And you don't find too many of those in politics these days. So when one presents itself, you got to do it.
Well, and we're grateful to you, sir, for viewing it like that and for making great strides, I think, in this direction and working in a bipartisan way as well to act and secure these wins, right? It
Absolutely.
is very rare. So I wanted to turn it over to you, sir, for some closing remarks. But before that, I just want to echo again how grateful we are to you for your time today and for your leadership. Our veterans and military families, I know many of them are in the audience today, and we're very grateful to you, sir, for your time today and your leadership.
Yeah, thank you, Mary. And thanks to the Vet Boys Foundation again for this effort. You all are a leader on this area, and I just think it's really important that veterans and veterans organizations continue to lead in this area because the connection between our public lands, our historical legacy, and what veterans fought for and sacrificed for is a very real and deep connection. And it's one that I think we can also relate to from a sense of duty and patriotism. Patriotism, I think, sometimes means something different to veterans than it does to others. And for me, I'll just speak for myself. It means that you have a sense of duty, that you have an obligation to others, and that has to translate into action. It's not just talk. It's not just a slogan. It's not just something, you're not patriotic because you say you are. You are because you do something. You do something that sometimes has cost, but you do it because it's the right thing to do and it's going to help other people and it's going to help future generations. And that's really what we're talking about here when we're talking about the environmental ethic, when we're talking about preservation, when we're talking about setting aside these beautiful, wonderful places that have a therapeutic value to our fellow veterans, but to the rest of the community as well. So I'm really honored to be working with all of you, and I appreciate your leadership and the opportunity to talk about it today.
Thank you so much, sir. I can't tell you how much we appreciate, again, your leadership, your being an ally to us and our network of veterans and military families. We're so grateful, and we stand ready to continue to support your great work in Congress to secure and protect our public lands. Thank you to our audience members for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed the program. We hope you will follow us on Twitter and Facebook, Vet Voice Foundation. Thank you again, Congressman Crow, for your time today. And we look forward to continuing this work together to protect our public lands.
Thank you, Mary. Take care. Be well.